Well, as you know, Pete, I did 2 weeks of quarantine in the lead up to the last sitting of Parliament. Because the break between Parliament now is only a maximum of 2 weeks, unfortunately, we're unable to go home without having to just turn around and come back. And so, of course, it's nice to be out of lockdown, but it's to do a job.
Yep, I understand that, but there's Victoria is still in lockdown, and it looks as though that's going to continue. So I'm wondering, you know, there may be an easing of restrictions coming up this weekend, but it's going to relate to social circumstances, not necessarily hospitality and business. This is according to the Victorian Premier. What's your view of that?
Well, I've always said that I think lockdowns are unsustainable, and they are. They're not a good mechanism for addressing a public health challenge. That's not just my opinion. The World Health Organization has come out in the past 24 hours and made it quite clear that lockdowns aren't sustainable and don't achieve public health outcomes. Lockdowns are actually built on an arrogance that people in positions of power have all the information to understand how to deal with a public health crisis, and it shows no respect for citizens taking responsibility. And that's the basis that the Victorian government has gone down. And the problem for Victoria now is the only pathway out of its lockdown eventually requires the state government to admit they've got it wrong. They don't understand how they're doing it. The Treasurer's right. They've strung it out, and they're going to have to continue stringing it out until they're prepared to admit to the public that the approach they have taken is wrong, has huge human costs, health costs, economic costs, of course, we know that the Premier is not one who likes to concede he's wrong.
No, but he's got all the power in this stoush, though, doesn't he? I mean, you're not alone. The Prime Minister has been asking him to get things going. The Treasurer, again on the show a little bit earlier, urging the Premier to change his view on this, but he's not listening. So what else can you do?
Yep. Well, the problem is that he's putting politics ahead of human lives. And we're seeing that because if he were prepared to concede the fundamental flaw, error in the thinking that's led to this lockdown, of course, people would rightly look at all the sacrifices they have made and turn around and question his conduct and his judgment. And they should. But the problem we have as a Commonwealth, but more critically as Victorians, is that there is a huge cost to the approach they have taken. Tragically, I know people who have committed suicide. The mental health consequences associated with this crisis is real. The delayed surgery and identification of other health conditions is real. That's before we even talk about the dollars and cents and the livelihoods that have been taken to.
So when he says that, and we don't know this for sure yet, but maybe this weekend he'll announce that you're allowed to go outside and in a larger group, or that 5-kilometre radius may well be extended, but nothing else. I mean, is it almost kind of thumbing the nose at every other part of society that kind of needs to function, and quickly?
Well, it does thumb the nose to every other section of the community. But again, I just say it comes from a position of arrogance and thinking that the government knows all and is able to manage this crisis. The basis in which we address a public health crisis isn't solved from Canberra or state capitals. It's solved from community and respecting citizens. And the foundational principles of lockdowns is to show no respect for citizens, no respect for their capacity to exercise responsibility and a mutual respect for others. And that's the basis in which Victoria's gone down. And as a consequence, there is a trail, and there's going to be a long tail, particularly in Victoria, of consequences for people because of that arrogance of the state government.
There's more business groups that are threatening legal action against the state government, questioning the validity of the lockdown, and this is also happening overseas as well, various businesses taking on their governments. Is this something that you would recommend if businesses can in fact afford it?
Well, I think it's critical that people constantly challenge authority, particularly when we have 5 million people have some of the most punitive measures as part of an ideological experiment in the state of Victoria. And one of the things is the state upper house, particularly MPs like Fiona Patten from the Reason Party, who claims to be a civil libertarian, has gone along with many of the measures that have been introduced in the state parliament and introduced by Dan Andrews. And when the state upper house isn't providing a proper check and balance on the government, we have a problem. I myself, as you know, wrote to the Human Rights Commission questioning why it was they weren't raising issues about the curfew, which eventually has been removed. But many of the other measures that operate should be challenged and questioned about what's the public health basis, what's the public order basis, because increasingly it seems it has no anchor in either of those things.
OK, and meanwhile, it looks as though the Premier is going to give up his phone, his calls and text messages as part of the inquiry into a hotel quarantine fiasco. Are you encouraged by that?
Well, I am, but I'm disappointed too. The reality is this is happening because, and to her enormous credit, Peter Credlin walked in to that press conference and asked him about it and persisted. It should not have come to that. The inquiry should have done it in the first place. I have an increasing diminishing confidence in whether this inquiry is actually serious about getting to the bottom of it. This information, this evidence was clearly needed from the start. And both the Premier should have volunteered the information, but the inquiry should have sought it. And it raises questions also about the extent to which the media is holding the state government to account too. OK, well, just onto the target, Stephen Conroy was on Sky News last night on Paul Murray's program saying that the Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, should resign, suggesting that there was no chance that numbers could ever get down to 5 and hold there for a specific amount of time. Do you agree with him? Well, I'm certainly concerned about whether the numbers are going to get down there, and it's quite clear now, both between what the Premier said and the Chief Health Officer has said, that the plan that they put for the Victorian people is unachievable, or they're putting as unachievable. And therefore, you have to question both the Premier and the Chief Health Officer's judgment about how they're managing the crisis. Because it's not just about finding a new COVID normal, it's a simple exercise of logic. You can't, viruses cannot be completely defeated until we have a vaccine, and even that, we hope we get one, but we can't guarantee that. So you need to find a sustainable way for a society to manage this crisis. And instead, the Victorian government, the Chief Health Officer, and of course the Premier have completely thrown any sort of logical reason their approach to the wind.
Just north of the border, just finally, Tim, the Queensland Deputy Premier has had a crack at the Prime Minister, saying he's taking a week off from leading the country to go and campaign for the LNP up in Queensland. Did you think that was curious, the selection of words that he chose to have a go at the Prime Minister?
Oh, look, the truth is it reflects more on the Deputy Premier than it does the Prime Minister, and I don't think anybody takes that comment seriously. Queenslanders are Australians too. The Prime Minister has every right to go and campaign strongly for the people of Queensland, the interests of Queensland, as part of the success of the nation, and more the power to him.
Just finally on news poll, are you encouraged by those numbers today?
Look, we all say we don't pay any attention to polls except, polling day itself. Obviously, the numbers are encouraging, but the truth is it reflects what the public sentiment is. People think the Prime Minister's doing a great job. The reason? He is. In very difficult circumstances, he's providing leadership for the country. I just wish some of the state premiers, particularly from my own state, would learn from it, understand that sustainable measures are the basis in which we as a country can move forward together.